In the Middle Ages, candy existed, but it didn't look like the candy we know today. It wasn't colorful, and it wasn't made for children. Instead, candy back then was more like a toolbox. You used what you had, honey, nuts, spices, and built sweetness from it. That's how different kinds of candy appeared across the world. In England, they used pine nuts in their sweets. In Italy, walnuts or almonds shaped the flavor instead. And in royal courts, some candies weren't even meant to be eaten first. They were displayed as decoration. As you'll see, there's a very high chance that you've already seen and even tasted something remarkably close to medieval candy. So in this video, we're going to explore the candies medieval people actually ate, and also what they looked like, who could afford them, and why they were so different from what we call candy today. Before we talk about medieval candies, one thing has to be made clear from the start. Candy in the Middle Ages was more like a technique, a way to preserve sweetness, to give it structure, or to enhance food for medicinal purposes. Medieval people did not divide food into treats and real food the way we do today, because sweetness was rare, valuable, and functional. And it was almost always tied to a purpose, like nourishment, digestion, social status, or medicine. When sweets were served, they usually appeared at the end of a meal, meant to close the stomach and aid digestion. Most importantly, medieval candy was not built primarily on sugar like it is today. So if medieval candy wasn't about sugar, what was it actually made of? Because medieval sweets were made from short, simple ingredient lists, nothing like the long industrial formulas we associate with candy today. And what they built from those few ingredients might surprise you. At its core, there were only two sweeteners. Honey was the standard. Sugar existed, but it was rare, expensive, and limited to specific contexts, which means most people never tasted the kind of candy we imagine today. Everything else worked like a building system layered on top of that base. Think of medieval candy not as recipes, but as a modular structure. Once you see the pattern, you'll start recognizing it everywhere. First came the sweet foundation. Most of the time, that foundation was honey, boiled, clarified, and concentrated. From there, additional elements were added depending on availability, purpose, and status. Nuts added structure and fat: walnuts, hazelnuts, almonds, pine nuts. They made sweets dense, sliceable, and filling. Fruits added acidity and texture. They balanced sweetness and helped with preservation. Spices defined function more than flavor: ginger, pepper, cinnamon, galangal, saffron. They were believed to warm the body, aid digestion, and stabilize heavy foods. These elements could be combined, removed, or emphasized, but the system stayed the same. So this wasn't random experimentation. It was a system. And the best way to understand it is to see what it produced. Now that we know what medieval candy was, let's look at what people actually ate. Across England, France, and large parts of Central Europe, the most common candies were honey-based confections. These sweets were dense, spiced, and sliceable. They were usually served in thin pieces rather than handfuls. One English example from the 15th century is pineade. The name itself already tells part of the story. Pineade incorporates the Middle English word for pine nut, pine or pine, directly into its name. It was made by boiling honey with warming spices like ginger, cinnamon, pepper, and galangal. Pine nuts were added, and the mixture was poured out and cut into slices once cooled. It appeared at feasts, in wealthy households, and at the end of meals. Its purpose was clear: sweet, warming, filling, and easy to portion. In medieval Italy, the same idea behind honey confections appears under a different name: nuccato. Nuccato was a dense honey nut sweet made by boiling honey and combining it with crushed nuts, most commonly walnuts. Depending on region and availability, almonds or hazelnuts could be used instead. The process followed the same logic as pineade. The result was chewy, rich, and highly stable. It could be cut, stored, and transported without spoiling quickly. Modern descriptions often compare nuccato to a small nougat, and that comparison is historically accurate. Nuccato belongs to the same Mediterranean tradition of honey and nut confections that later produced Tyrone. But not every medieval sweet followed a straight line into the present. One of the most familiar names hides the biggest surprise. That surprise is gingerbread. When we hear gingerbread today, we might be thinking of Lebkuchen, gingerbread men in Christmas markets. That version is a modern invention. Medieval gingerbread looked nothing like the version we know today. There was no dough, no baking, no flour-based cake. Instead, medieval gingerbread was a dense honey confection built around ginger. Honey was boiled and carefully skimmed. Ground ginger was added, often together with other expensive spices like pepper and saffron. Then finely grated breadcrumbs were stirred in until the mass became firm enough to cut. The mixture was pressed into blocks, dusted with cinnamon, and sliced. When gingerbread first appeared in medieval Europe, it was accessible only to the very wealthy. Spices like ginger, pepper, and saffron were luxury imports, tied to long-distance trade and high status. By the 14th century, expanding spice trade routes, a growing wealthy merchant class, and the relatively lower cost of ginger compared to other spices made gingerbread affordable beyond royal courts and accessible to average wealthy households. Its role changed with that shift. Originally, gingerbread was closer to medicine than dessert because it was valued for warming the body and aiding digestion, especially after heavy meals. Over time, the medicinal role faded into the background, and gingerbread became one of the clearest examples of how medieval medicine slowly turned into candy. Another major category, beyond the ones we've already seen, was sugar-based candy, but it belonged to a different world. These sweets appear most often in court records, monasteries, and apothecaries, not in everyday kitchens. One of the most common forms were comfits. Comfits were small seeds, like anise, coriander, fennel, coated in sugar until they formed smooth, hard pearls. They were eaten after meals, used as breath fresheners, or offered to guests as a sign of refinement. Their presence alone signaled wealth. And the reason is simple: sugar was expensive. Around the year 1390, a pound of refined sugar could cost 12 to 18 pence. That may not sound dramatic until you put it into context. Most peasants and laborers at the time earned about 1 pound to 2 pounds per year, roughly 240 to 480 pence in total annual income. Spending even a small portion of that on sugar would have been unthinkable. For them, sugar was not food. It was unreachable. Comfits are explicitly listed in Form of Curie, the official cookery register of Richard II's court. That alone signals wealth. Comfits weren't just sweet. They were proof of access to trade, proof of wealth, proof that candy, once sugar entered the picture, became a marker of power. Alongside comfits, there was another type of medieval candy, one that grew out of fruit preservation. Today, when we eat an orange, the peel goes straight into the trash. It's bitter, it's inconvenient, and we know we can buy another orange tomorrow. In the medieval world, that logic didn't exist. Oranges, lemons, and limes did not grow locally in most of Europe. They arrived through trade, expensive, seasonal, and uncertain. When a citrus fruit entered a medieval kitchen, nothing was wasted. The peel wasn't garbage, it was the most valuable part. By soaking peels to remove bitterness and preserving them in sugar or honey, people turned something fleeting into something permanent. Sugar didn't just make citrus peels sweet. It absorbed moisture from the fruit or peel, which preserved it for long periods of time. It made them available in winter, months after the fresh fruit was gone. That's why candied citrus shows up in elite households and medical contexts. It allowed rare, imported flavors to survive long past their season. The same thinking applied to roots. Today, ginger sits year-round on supermarket shelves. In the Middle Ages, it arrived through long trade routes and was valued first as medicine. Candied ginger wasn't a snack. It was a controlled way to preserve a powerful root. While gingerbread slowly became a social treat, candied ginger stayed closer to medicine. It was eaten after meals to warm the body and settle digestion, exactly as medieval humoral theory recommended. And unlike fresh ginger, it could be stored for months without spoilage. So, if you've eaten candied ginger, nougat, or sugar-coated almonds, you've already tasted medieval candy. But the method behind it is centuries old. And without realizing it, you've already held a medieval confection in your hand.